from what I understand, it took you years to land this interview. Is that right?
Yeah, so in 2022, the summer of 2022, I happened to be spending a month in Los Angeles, and the editor of the Sunday Times back then asked me to try and get an interview. And he's been through various different people, so it's relatively hard to sort of find out exactly who was representing him at any one time at that point. But I emailed somebody, and at that point, he was just putting the finishing touches to, I think, Jean de Barry, a film that premiered in Cannes last year, I think. And they said the time wasn't right, but let's stay in touch. And we actually did. And it was one of those sort of, quite frankly, quite rare instances in this business where people kind of stuck to their word. And then about sort of like I'd say a couple of years later, they got in touch because he was about to bring out a directorial debut, which is going to be at the San Sebastian Film Festival, a film called Modi, which is about the painter Modigliani. And it was, it's not his directorial debut. He made a film a few years ago, but this was like this was sort of his. They were very excited about it, and we had some discussions, and essentially it did take a long time to finally set a meeting. But I'd say a good 2.5 years after first emailing and having a few emails over the course of that time, we did eventually sit down in a room together.
Jonathan, were you given parameters or no-go zones? Because one of the reasons celebrities increasingly avoid print is that they have zero control over the final outcome. Unlike sitting for a television interview with a known outlet, unlike communicating with your fans unmediated via social media, it's a real trust exercise for someone. And we don't really land on the side of celebrities here at The Nerve, but given the stakes for a Johnny Depp, that's a real risk for him to sit with a print journalist.
Yeah, but I think he's just incredibly old school, which is the point that I do repeat in my piece for many different reasons. But over the last few years, in what I do, which is to sit down with people and take our conversation and write it into some sort of narrative, that's what I do. There has been a sense that people want to do it less. They obviously believe that they can, if they're pushing something, they can push it via social media. There's a sense among the absolute A-list that they don't need to do this anymore. But my argument has always been, which is still just about keeping me in work, is that actually fans do want to hear from them in this sort of format. They don't want to just hear from A-listers on an Instagram post because there's no personality there. You're not learning anything. And I think people who have a fandom, think about how we all grew up knowing people, which goes back to Johnny Depp. When he admired people when he was growing up, whether the countercultural comedians who he loved, various actors who he admired, he would have read profiles with them. He would have read interviews with them. And I think you get a real window into it. So I think, yes, there is sort of a risk. I maintain that there's less of a risk than people think. Headlines are slightly different, but obviously every quote that we include has to be their quotes. So because or else we'd obviously be it's against the law. So I kind of feel that there's a trust thing there. But I just think profile-wise, he's so old school. He's so from an era when people did this sort of thing and spent time with journalists. I think he quite likes that idea.
It's interesting because in preparing to talk to you, and I was so fascinated to read your piece for the very reasons that you just stated. I love a formal framing of a piece, a hook, another, a profiler's is sort of your Trojan horse, your entree into that world. The last lengthy print interview I think that Depp sat for was with Rolling Stone, an American publication. It ran in June of 2018. It was called The Trouble with Johnny Depp. And it was a bruiser of an article. I mean, the reporter, who you could tell really kind of went in liking Johnny Depp, seemed to exit very alarmed at the copious amount of drugs, alcohol, paid people around this guy. He said basically nobody around this guy is not on the payroll. The finances were collapsing. He had just gotten divorced from Amber Heard. The tattoos, he had Slim, which was his nickname for her, turned into Scum, which he's since turned into Scam. It's very Winona Wino forever. And I wondered if part of sitting with you guys is because you're a London outlet. The bar for, celebrities who sue for libel, it's a much lower bar than in the United States. Do you think that had, because he spends a lot more time in London now than he does in the States?
He certainly did at that point. Yeah, the house that I met him in, which is in the middle of Soho in London. I mean, it's like it's incredible. He'd been hiding out there for so long. It's so smack bang in the middle of London. It's a place I walked past umpteen times, but nobody knew that he lived there,
Amazing.
which created its own problems because obviously he couldn't really leave. But anyway, that's another thing. But I think in a way, yeah, I do get that. I do get the sense that he kind of, I think also he does treat London, and he has done for a long time, as home, or he certainly treated France as home. So like he
Hmm.
treats kind of like so that there was a sense of Europe as opposed to the US. And he told me he doesn't spend that much time in the US. He's got a place in the Bahamas, and he had a place in London. And since we met, he's left that particular place, but still he is still around. So I think there's a sense of that. I also think the reason he did this, as opposed to the Rolling Stone piece, is that we all go through these phases in our lives. We all have these moments when we all, there are things that stay the same, and there are things that change. But the key thing here is that pretty much a day after we met, one of the times he went off to shoot Day Drinker with Penelope Cruz, which is a big, but what it
Day
like,
Drinking is the title, the working
yeah,
title of this film, which again is
exactly.
a bold move.
It is. He's definitely playing into an image. But I feel like, you go to make a big film like that. It's got a major Hollywood director, Mark Webb. It's got Penelope Cruz in it. This is the sort of thing where you need to, frankly, behave. You need to sort of act in a way that is sort of consummate with other professionals on set. So I do think there's a sense that if that time when he did the Rolling Stone piece, and at other times in his life, around that era, there was clearly a dishevelment, that there was clearly chaos. I do feel a bit like now he is re-entering the world where you kind of can't do that now, because then you're just not going to get work.
Well, he hasn't really gotten a major role since this entire thing exploded. His last big role was in Fantastic Beasts 3. That was in 2023, 2022, I believe. And since then, he's been doing indie films, kind of keeping a low profile. I want to take a quick look at this clip. He was interviewed with his director at Cannes. I think this was back in 2021, and he was sort of being asked about, or he was directly being asked about, now becoming a pariah in Hollywood. Let's take a look at this.
I mean, there's no, I don't have. Why?
And that sort of just goes to what at least then seemed to be his fundamental either unwillingness or inability to understand that the disclosures in this trial, which included multiple photos of him passed out in day clothes, looking like, frankly, I mean, he's an admitted hard drug user, a junkie, like an alcoholic, like a sad old alcoholic. The disclosure about the poop in the bed and who left it there. The admission on both sides that there had been some kind of violence, the fingertip that he lost. And we saw that image in the trial of Johnny on a gurney in an emergency room, holding his or three quarters of the finger he had remaining. All of it was just, it was like the curtain was ripped back, and it was like, the image that you had of this guy could not be further from reality. And what, Jonathan, was your sense of how much he's absorbed the severity of the damage that was done to his reputation and career?
I think this is an interesting thing, though, because all of those things, I put them all in the piece, and we talked to that, and I was most staggered a bit, like, in a way, about why he went through two trials. He went through two trials. You sort of go, the first trial here, which was the libel case, which he lost, kind of, you'd be a bit like, we know so much now. Nobody really needs to know more. Surely he doesn't want people to know more. And then that's why I was like, why go through it again in Virginia? And so I just didn't really understand that. I think there's a general sense when you ask how much he's sort of taken this on, what's happened to his career. The thing is, I don't think it's massively affected his career. I'll caveat that by saying that you're right. There's been a good sort of like 5-year gap where he hasn't been in any major movies. Sort of, he He did Minamata, which was a tiny film. He did Jean de Barry, which was a tiny French film, and they feel a little bit differently about certain things, I think, than the Brits and the Americans. But and now he's directed a film about Modigliani, which does have Al Pacino and Stephen Graham in it, but it's still a small film. But now you kind of go, I think one thing that's really telling is he had this art exhibition in Manhattan last September called A Bunch of Stuff, which is a collection of various bits of Johnny's art.
I remember it. It was not received well critically.
No. At the opening of it, at the opening of the exhibition, so the opening party, you had Jim Jarmusch, who's the indie kind of kingpin, but you also had Jerry Bruckheimer. So you had you had sort of somebody from his indie world, somebody from his obviously kind of kind of the biggest blockbusters he's ever been in, the Pirates films. And I don't think we're that far away at all after the Penelope Cruz film of him being in possibly another Pirates, possibly another big blockbuster. Jerry's on his side still, and then also you look at one of the things I thought was really interesting. There was an event, I think it was in April. I might get the date slightly wrong, but there was a Patti Smith tribute again in New York, and Johnny was on stage that night. Had Scarlett Johansson there, and he was also on stage with Michael Stipe, Bruce Springsteen, and Patti Smith. And you're going, like, if you wanted to sort of make a list of kind of, let's say, like liberal heroes who lots of people who don't like Johnny Depp would say that they're the ones who've taken against him. It's a tacit approval of him by being on stage with him. And so all of this stuff about his career being damaged, I sort of had the impression that he decided, maybe I'm going to ride it out. I'm going to make a few small films to sort of keep me busy. I'll do my art. Now I'm going to be in a Penelope Cruz film. Next, I think he'll be in a blockbuster. There's nothing really to say that now the 5 or so years have gone, that this will affect his career at all.
I think most people, the headline of your piece is very, very tantalizing. It's a quote directly from Depp saying, "I was a crash test dummy for Me Too." And this has been going on for so long that I forgot its origination was before Harvey. These allegations against him by Amber Heard, and the second trial, this whole narrative has gone on so long that Harvey exploded kind of in the middle of things, and so for better or for worse, the Me Too explosion did, he caught a lot of shrapnel for that. But in reading your piece, he lost his longtime agent, Tracy Jacobs. A lot of the people, as you said at the top of this thing, a lot of his original people have gone. They have left. I wonder how much of this damage is really his self-inflicted wounds of drug and alcohol abuse, because they were having a lot of trouble with him on that shoot. It was a pirate shoot in Australia, and he wasn't showing up on time. He was missing hours and days, and they all knew it was because of the partying.
I agree. And I think this is why it feels like that sort of like last chance saloon thing a bit for him. I think he's somebody who, I mean, it's very complicated, obviously, but I feel like, but I feel there's a sense of him that he wants, for all the stuff that he said. One thing I didn't agree with him about at all, for all the things that he said to me about accidental fame and never wanting to be famous and never wanting to be spotted by people, and
they
and
all
also,
say that. They all say it.
But also,
you don't get to be a movie star of this magnitude without really working for it. Like, it just doesn't happen.
But the biggest thing about that with him is he wants this, like, again. I think he's all this stuff happened when people left him, or because of what he did or what they did, or whatever. He lost his team. And I think kind of like now, I think he's sort of, and he did suffer the career. He lost a lot of the career that he had, because he was basically sacked essentially from Fantastic Beasts. I don't think it was particularly mutual. I think there's a sense that he does want this. He knows this is the last chance soon, and he wants to be able to write his own narrative. He wants to be respected and revered and famous again. And it's all I think it's all incredibly meticulous. I think there's this idea of him being quite, let's say, ramshackle, being, sort of like when I interviewed him, he was drinking most of the time. But then,
oh God.
But then he's like lucid with it. This is the thing, I think there's a level of, of like drink, which we all know we can take. And if he's at that level at this point, then like fine. Anyway, so he was drinking most of the time, but I think it's really interesting. I think he's sort of he knows exactly what he's doing. You know, he's like, you know, doing the art exhibition. Having, I almost think he almost deliberately picked Jarmusch and Bruckheimer. He would have loved he would have loved doing the Patti Smith thing. So sorry, but so my point saying he was like drinking all the time, and he is ramshackle in conversation doesn't mean that I don't think he's doing everything very step by step. He's plotting this kind of comeback, which he doesn't like to call it, but it is
Right.
very, very carefully.
Yeah, it's and obviously your piece is step one in sort of trying to re-enter uh, the arena with the likes of the Tom Cruises of the world. I mean, he was never gunning for that kind of stardom in a career, that branding, but you know, that's a Jerry Bruckheimer production as well. Tom Cruise, you know, halfway. I mean, you got to give Tom Cruise a lot of credit, but it will be fascinating to see if Johnny Depp can pull this off and become what he once was and secure his legacy. It seems like you think he can.
I think he can because you only have to look at, and I think this gets complicated as well because like you only really have to look at the people who he's working with to sort of see how much a
Hmm.
reputation has been mended. Like
Hmm.
Mark Webb just did the Snow White remake, and then
Oh
obviously
my
that is,
God, he's in it too. The Snow White remake. That was a big colossal disaster of publicity. Publicity that his leading lady did that in.
so basically you sort of go like he, you know, like, but he is a Hollywood player for want of a
Yeah,
better
of
word.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so you know he did two Spider-Man film. So you're going, you know, like by working with him again, like Penelope, again the Patti Smith
Hmm.
thing, whatever he does next, you know that you know by association, and also the people who frankly turned up at the trial that Winona turned up at the trial, Vanessa Paradis turned up at the trial, like you know Kate Moss did a sort of
Yes.
thing. He has the sort of backing of the type of A-lister that means that he will inevitably come back. I really don't see him. A lot of the Me Too thing was bracketing lots of people together. You know, like
Hmm.
sort of, you know, like,
Hmm.
and I feel like in a way, you know, and I don't necessarily want to get into sort of just like naming names, but he's obviously he's significantly further along in a comeback than say Kevin Spacey, who doesn't have
Right.
anyone who doesn't seem to have anyone particularly on his side.
Right.
Whereas Depp, you see by association the support that he has, and that's the kind of support that pushes you further and further to basically just go back to where he was.